Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today at our Monterey's Magical History Tour with local historian Tim Thomas. Today we'll be talking about J.B. Phillips, the other doc, and this is part two. We do have part one on our YouTube page, so if you want to revisit that, you're more than welcome. Just a couple ground rules before we get going. I ask that everyone please put themselves on mute just to limit the distractions. And then also, if you do have questions, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat or hold off, and we're going to have some time at the very end for some questions. So if something comes up and you want to get it down, please put it in the chat and I'll read them at the end, or you can say them out loud at the very end. But after that, we're set to go. Tim, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone. Let's see if we get this thing. I have a lot of stuff today. Let's see if that works. Here we go. Let's see. We want that. Hang on here. All right. You all can see that today?
I don't think it's shared yet.
Oh, hang on. I thought I did. Hang on for a second. There we go.
There we go.
Yeah. I must have pushed the wrong button. All right. So welcome again, everyone. Thank you. Again, my name is Tim Thomas, and I am a fisheries historian and have researched the human history of Monterey Bay for well over 30 years. I was the historian and curator for the old Monterey Maritime Museum for many years. That's how I got into all of this, in particular this material concerning J.B. Phillips. Just a little background. I know some of you were on part of it last month, so I'm going to repeat some of these things. But those of you who weren't here last month, of course, J.B. Phillips was a fish and game biologist who went to work for Fish and Game in Monterey in 1929 and spent his entire government career here in Monterey. He actually retired in Monterey in 1972. He had his office at Hopkins Marine Station. Fish and Game Fish and Game was founded in California in 1909, and almost immediately they had come to Monterey. They did not open their first office here until 1919, which also was Hopkins Marine Station. And the reason they opened their office at Hopkins, because the main reason they came to Monterey at that time and opened the office was to monitor the then rapidly growing sardine fishery in Monterey. The sardine fishery up to about 1915 was kind of a small little secondary fishery. And the big money really in Monterey at that time in terms of fish was really in salmon. And once World War I started up and the sardine fisheries on the East Coast were shut down, particularly the ones in the North Atlantic, and people wanted to eat their sardines, it really took off here on the West Coast and grew quite rapidly. Back to 1915, there were 2 canneries operating in Monterey. There was maybe 60 Sicilian fishermen or so here. At the end of World War I, 1919, when Fish and Game opened their offices here, there were 9 full-time sardine canneries along the Monterey waterfront, and actually almost 400 Sicilian fishermen here, and also a great number of Japanese fishermen here in Monterey. So they did open their office at Hopkins so they could be close to those canneries. So over the many years that I've been researching these fisheries, I oftentimes use the work of the California Department of Fish and Game. They would produce these wonderful, what they called fish bulletins. They, I believe, were monthly, they were regional, and they were very contemporary of their times, and they were oftentimes about little singular kind of fisheries. And these biologists would go out and spend time with the fishermen, and they'd write these wonderful reports about the gear they're using, who these people were. Oftentimes they were very culturally related. They really are amazing pieces, really a great historical document today. The first one they actually did was in 1913, a guy by the name of Charles Lincoln, who was written by Charles Lincoln. He was a biologist who taught actually UCLA, so he wasn't a fish and game guy at that time. But he wrote a whole beautiful piece about abalone, and he was in Monterey and spent time with the Monterey Abalone Company and actually went diving with them and wearing Japanese dive gear and wrote about it. It was really one of the last things that really got me, no pun intended, hooked to all that kind of stuff. So the J.B. Phillips name is something I saw quite frequently, and because he wrote a number of these reports, a lot about sardines, but in particular, he wrote about bass and sharks. He wrote about squid, and he wrote about rockfish in particular. And so I didn't know much about him at the time. Always was something I was interested in. He actually passed away in the 1990s, and when he did, his son name was Don, who didn't live in Monterey, but he came to take care of his mother had passed away a few years before that. He came to take care of the family home and ran across all these documents and photographs, and he contacted me about it through the Maritime Museum, and I went down and checked it out and was just totally blown away because they kept the office open at Hopkins strictly for Julie Phillips because he'd been there for so long. And so when he retired, they finally closed that office down and they relocated out on Garden Road. But they kept that office open just for him. And when they closed it, he just boxed absolutely everything up that was in that office and took it home, including all the correspondence. It goes back even before his times. All the letters that go back to when they first set up that office, literally hundreds and hundreds of letters and little daily notebooks and daily diaries, and then of course there are the photographs. Don said to me, "Tim, I got this box of photographs. Would you be interested in them?" And I said, "Well, sure. Let's go take a look." And he hands me this file of photographs that consists of a little over 500 photographs and their negatives that chronicle the Monterey fishing history starting in about 1929, covers all the way up to the day he retired. It is the most remarkable, and I'm not kidding. This is the most important fisheries collection of Monterey that exists. There's nothing like it anywhere. There are things that we had never seen before, things we had only heard about before. And to top it all off, he actually, on the back of every photograph, he took the time to write the who, what, where, and how. So all of that was there. It's just a totally incredible collection that now resides at the Monterey Library. So this photograph you see here, of course, this is Julie Phillips. This was taken about 1930. Of course, that's a giant squid, the Humboldt squid. And then there's two little market squid underneath them here. Comparing, this is at Hopkins Marine Station, and evidently were catching about a Humboldt squid in Monterey at that time. So one of the things he would do, besides just the sardine stuff, initially they were monitoring the sardine fishery, but they also would go and monitor some of the other fisheries, but they also, if something unusual was being caught in the bay, like the Humboldt squid, they would go and they would record it, they'd photograph it, and get what kind of information they could get about it. Our idea is to look at a lot. He was a beautiful photographer. I used to like to say that he had the mind of a scientist and the eye of the artist, and I think you'll see that as we go along here. This is a wonderful photograph that he took in 1948. This is the L.A. Yenny family. This is Mr. Yenny here. This is actually in his garage in Salinas, and this photograph was taken. This fish was, which at that time was called the Willoughby's Ragfish. I believe it has a different name today, but it was a deep water fish, and he caught this off the Monterey breakwater. So it was pretty unusual. And so Julie did go out and he photographed it. And he actually wrote a paper about this particular fish. But I love the image of the family here, the proud family, and the dad with his fish, his Willoughby's Ragfish. And I've shown this photograph for years at different programs I've given, different kinds of talks. I keep hoping that someday I'll be able to find this family. I'd love for them to get a copy of this photograph. So let's start. I'm going to try to go through some of these fisheries. I tried to put this in some kind of alphabetical order. So A is for abalone, right? So here is a wonderful photograph. In fact, this is a photograph of an abalone dive boat taken off of Point Sur. This is the only known photograph of an abalone working boat in Monterey Bay that we know of. It's the only one we've ever seen. There are some that were taken that were staged for magazine shoots and things, but this is the only known one actually taken of a working boat. And you can see the boat in the water here, and here's the hose of the diver, and you can see the bubbles right here. There's 3 guys on the boat here, so here's the guy on the skull, which is the oar on the back. This is you only found these on the Japanese boats, so they didn't work with the motor, they worked with the skull here, and that way they would track the diver under the water, by his bubbles, and that way they wouldn't run over his hose with the motor, right? Because they didn't have a motor right there. Then the support crew got on the lifeline, and that kind of and the other guy who would be handling the baskets of abalone that were coming up. And then the mother boat, because these guys would go off for 3-4 days at a time, the mother boat is probably not too far off this way. So I've had this photograph for years, and all it says on the back is it gives me the year, and it says Point Sur, but it doesn't tell me where at Point Sur. And I don't know if anybody has been down to Point Sur or taken that tour up to the lighthouse, and there's that nice windy road that takes you up there. I'm a docent at Point Sur now and have been for a number of months now, so I've been on that road a lot. And I finally tracked down exactly where he was standing to take this particular photograph. It took me a while because he's standing at a particular angle that cuts off some of the other rocks that are down there. But I know exactly where he was when he took this photograph. It's really a really important photograph to see right there. So here is the mother boat that I talked about. This was taken in 1938. And you can see what I love about this photograph. This is at the Monterey Wharf. And you can see these are the dive suits they're drawing on right here. You can see them here. And on the back, these are what's called live boxes, which is technology that came from Japan. And so the Japanese, before World War II, ruled the Monterey Wharf. The majority of the businesses on the Monterey Wharf were Japanese-owned businesses. There were fish markets, abalone processing. These live boxes, I have another picture here. Here's a close-up of the live boxes. These were they were made locally. Sino Brothers at the Boatworks made these boxes for them. They were made out of redwood. Is how they kept the abalone fresh, because I mentioned they're out for 3-4 days at a time, and they bring the abalone in, they put them into these boxes on top of each other. The abalone actually would feed off of the things that are growing on the shell of the abalone, and they kept them in the water. Of course, it's redwood, and the water would flow through the boxes right there. That's how they kept them fresh until they brought them into Monterey. Also, you can see in this photograph here, those are abalone baskets that you see right there that they're bringing back in. They bring it into the Monterey Wharf, and then here is unloading those abalone. Here are the live boxes. They're unloading them here. So when this picture was taken, there were 9 abalone companies, all Japanese, operating off the Monterey Wharf. Abalone season at that time could be 9 to 10 months. That's how long it would last. And these guys would be gone 3-4 days at a time, usually going south. They would also go north up towards Santa Cruz. And each boat would come back with 200 dozen large red abalone. Each boat would come in with that much abalone, and they're unloading it into these boxes here, then pulling it directly up into the abalone cannery. Here is you can see a better close-up of the abalone here, and that being loaded into the box to get ready to be pulled into the cannery. So there were a few different abalone canneries on the wharf. There was one Palladini cannery, which is on the end of the wharf, which was not Japanese, actually. It was cut from San Francisco, but most of them were Japanese. In fact, there was a large abalone cannery about where the Fisherman's Grotto is today on the wharf, and it was actually a big co-op. That's what it was. All the Japanese companies used this one cannery, and they all shared it, worked together. All the workers in the canneries, for the most part, were Japanese. These Japanese ladies were pulling the abalone out of the shell. It's a beautiful photograph. And then here they are cleaning the abalone after they come out of the shell. I'll wash them. And this guy's actually pulling it out of the shell as well. You see it right there. And then they'll slice them to make the abalone steaks, which was a process that was created by a German restaurateur named Papa Nestelter in 1908 at his restaurant on Alvarado Street when he created the abalone steak. Here in Monterey, and he literally created an industry for this, because prior to that, the Japanese, they were actually here before the turn of the 20th century, mainly because of abalone. That's what brought them here. In fact, there was a letter written to Japan in a guy by the name of Otosabu Noda, who wrote a letter in the late 1890s to the government of Japan describing this incredible resource of abalone. He said there was so much abalone that he literally described it as being a carpet of abalone, and nobody's doing anything with it. And the reason nobody's doing anything with it because nobody knew. I mean, what the heck are you supposed to do with it? Unless you're eating abalone properly, it's kind of like eating a rubber boot. And the Japanese who've been dealing with abalone for centuries, they knew exactly what to do with it. And so they created an entire abalone industry, and really, not just in Monterey, but throughout California. Monterey was literally was the abalone capital of the world. At one point, and that goes back thousands of years, actually. But in 1929, the California abalone industry was bringing in about $1 million in revenue. In 1929, $1 million was a lot of money. 75% of that $1 million was right here in Monterey. Here they are slicing those abalone steaks, and then here they are pounding those abalone steaks. Again, this is a process created by Popper and Stolzer. Now, you just didn't pound it. There was a certain technique to doing it. Now, you'll notice that these are all Japanese, except this guy right here. He is not Japanese. So I asked my good friend Roy Katori. Roy was the last of the Japanese abalone divers. In fact, Roy was the only abalone diver that was born here in Monterey, so he was Nisei. All the other divers came from Japan, with just a couple of exceptions, returned to Japan, but Roy was born here in Monterey. And he told me, because his mother actually had her own cannery that was in the Booth Cannery, where it was next to Monterey Wharf. And he told me that they would sometimes hire these old Sicilian guys to pound the tough steaks. So there was a lot of restrictive laws put into the Japanese about dealing with abalone. One of them was they could not export the shells out of the state. So oftentimes they would dump the shells over the side of the wharf. In fact, I've been told by kayakers, you can still go around the wharf and still find abalone shells down there. But most of the time they trucked them out to Seaside or Sand City and dumped them in the sand dunes out there. And this is out in Seaside, somewhere near Roberts Lake, actually, where this photograph was taken. And these are a couple of fish and game guys walking around the piles of abalone shell out there. So here's our fish and game guys, really important. This is a woman named Frances Clark. This is what we're looking at is Clarkie and her boys. Frances Clark was a woman way ahead of her time. She was the first person within Fish and Game to receive a PhD, which she got in 1925. So they weren't sure what to do with her. They said, well, let's make her the librarian. Well, she took a series of books, sat on a man's desk, and built it in one of the premier fisheries libraries in the world. It's now here in the Monterey area. And it's split up amongst different libraries. And then she went on to run all the starting programs that the Fish and Game did here in California. This actually is taken at the 1929 California clam census, which was evidently, I've been told, was kind of a prestigious thing to be invited to go do. And so that's Frances Clark. This is a guy named W.L. Schofield. And now there were 3 Schofield brothers that worked for Fish and Game. They're all biologists. W.L. or Lance Schofield, his brother M.B. Schofield, who was the older brother, and he was actually the head of the Marine Division for Fish and Game at that time. And then there was a third brother who also was a biologist, whose initials have escaped me, but he left Fish and Game before the other brothers did. And then this is a guy named Richard Croker. This is M.J. Linder, and then this is J.B. Phillips right there in that picture. So Julie didn't take that particular picture. So now we have A, the abalone. This is B for basking sharks. This is a guy named Whitey Arbo. Whitey Arbo was a Moss Landing fisherman, and this was taken in 1948, actually. The basking shark fishery actually started way before this. It started in 1920s, actually, again, by Popper and Stolzer, the abalone guy. He actually had a abalone boat, and he started as a promotional way to promote his restaurant. And he and a guy named Henry Leopard, who was a local blacksmith, sort of teamed up, and they would take the rich folks, the guests from the Hotel Willoughby, out on their Pop's abalone boat. And then for 50 cents, you would be able to harpoon a basking shark. In those days, there were a number of old Portuguese whalers living in Monterey at that time. Monterey had a very active whaling industry in the 19th century, and it was all Portuguese. And these guys would show these tourists how to throw the harpoon and tell them stories of whaling in the Monterey Bay. And then because the boat was equipped with a air compressor for the abalone divers, when they finally killed that basket shark, and it took a lot to do that actually, they would oftentimes pump the carcass of the shark with air so it would float. It'd flip on his belly, then Henry Leopard would get on the belly and dance on the belly of the shark for the tourists. So basket sharks are, for reasons that no one's been able to explain to me, would appear into the Monterey Bay beginning in the 1920s in spring months in particular, in very, very large numbers, I mean by the hundreds. They're coming in to feed. Basket sharks are the second largest fish in the world. Whale sharks are the largest. Basket sharks, of course, have no teeth. They're filter feeders. So they're pretty docile, but they're pretty strong fish. So oftentimes when they would harpoon these animals, they would drag those boats through the bay until they could slow them down, and then they would actually kill them with a shotgun. That's how they would usually do it. So Pop was charging 50 cents. This is a boat called the Two Brothers. It was a sport boat, a leisure boat at that time, run by these two brothers, the Gilkey brothers, and they started doing basket shark hunts, and they were only charging 25 cents. And then oftentimes when they would harpoon the shark, one of the Gilkey brothers would jump on the belly of that shark and ride on it as it was pulling the boat. And now basket shark's skin is like little teeth. Literally, it would tear up the legs of these guys when they did that. So here is another basket shark boat, and you can see it here. A couple of basket shark fishermen here, and you can see the barrel in the back here. Anybody remembers the old movie Jaws when they put the barrel and they're trying to slow the shark down? That's like what this was for as well. The idea was it would try to slow that basket shark down. They actually were using water heaters at one point. That's what they were using to do that kind of thing at one point. And what they're getting, by the way, the basket shark is they were after the livers of the basket shark. Initially, they weren't doing anything with them. And then there was a guy named Max Schaefer who was in the reduction business at that time, and he began to buy them, and he was grinding up for dog and cat food, but he was after the livers. Livers will produce sort of a low-grade vitamin A, and he was making this stuff called sun shark liver oil, and he promised you would ail anything. He promised to ail you. Anything that ailed you, it would cure it. It was sort of being advertised as the Viagra of its day. And then here's another couple of basket shark fishermen. This was taken at Hopkins Marine Station. Of course, this is not a basket shark. This is a great white shark. And this is a man named Bill Tomlinson. And the other guy on the end is Jack Daniels. That is his name. And on the back of this particular photograph, it said these guys were paid $50 for getting this great white shark. And I'm not sure what that was all about there, actually, why they got that $50 there. So the basket shark fishery initially was started by Pop Ernest in 1925. Max Schaefer's plant burned down. It was in Seaside at that time, where the old beach hotel is today. His plant burned down in 1938. They ended that fishery. It was revitalized by Wiley Arbo in 1948. And he brought the basket sharks into Moss Landing, where Newt Hobden of Hobden's Cannery, where the aquarium is today, he actually had a cannery at that time in Moss Landing. He said, I could do something with those. Here's a basket shark being brought up from the slip onto the truck. We're going to truck it over to his cannery, where they're going to take out the liver. That's the liver of a basket shark right here. This liver could be 2,500 pounds. Whitey Harbo told me he got one that was 3,800 pounds. It had about 800 gallons of this low-grade vitamin A. And Newt Hogan's idea was he was going to sell it to paint manufacturers and soap manufacturers. But he found out when you put it in the paint wouldn't dry. And you put it in the soap wouldn't lather. But it was really good for tan and leather. And that's pretty much what they did with it. And they also were grinding up for dog and cat food and that kind of thing. They weren't making a lot of money at this, but they got them through the days they weren't fishing sardines and other things like that. Of course, this is a sperm whale. This photograph was taken in 1963. Actually at Cypress Point, right up to the golf course, actually is right up over here. And I don't know how anyone knows out there when the last whaling station in the United States actually closed. You might be surprised, but the last whaling station in California actually closed in 1972 in Richmond. It was Del Monte Foods Company, and they're getting mostly for dog and cat food, and that's killed this was a young sperm whale. They evidently lost it and it washed up onto the beach there. The Cypress Point Golf Course and their clubhouse, they actually have the harpoon that came out of this whale. I used it in an exhibit at the Maritime Museum once and I actually used this photograph there for it. So here's another old Fish and Game, the sea otter exercise program. No, actually, this is a dead sea otter. So sea otters, of course, were heavily hunted in the 18th and 19th century. They thought they were hunted to extinction. A small raft of otters were found down off of Bixby Creek Bridge in 1938. Of course, the sea otters were able to survive, because it was difficult to get down to Point Sur or down to Big Sur. And so that's mainly probably why they did survive. But Fish and Game actually knew they were down there before they were found in 1938. They just didn't announce they were down there. They didn't want to tell anybody, because they were concerned that people would go after them. Well, Fish and Game didn't know is those Japanese abalone divers who love to fish down at Point Sur, were their favorite places to go. Well, they knew about those sea otters as well, because those sea otters love to eat abalone. And when they were pulling their abalone up in those baskets, of course, the otters would go after them. They're a real nuisance to them. And so I interviewed a gentleman who, when as a boy, grew up at the Point Sur Light Station. His father was an assistant lighthouse keeper there. And he loved to watch the divers during the day. And he said at night, you can hear them firing guns from their boats. And what those guys are doing, they were hunting these otters. The otters were a nuisance to them. The Japanese divers used to refer to them as sea cats, which that all stopped again in 1938 once they found that raft, and the world learned there were still sea otters out there. And this particular otter actually is one of the otters that was found in that raft down off of Big Sur. That unfortunately had died. Of course, another fishery, sort of a funny little fishery, really kind of a kelpery, I guess you'd call it, in Monterey. This is in the 1930s. This is 1931. Was kelp. This is bull kelp. Bull kelp is the single strand kelp. Oftentimes you walk along the beach, you see that big, thick kelp, big bulb on the end. I've been told by psychologists that bull kelp was the predominant kelp in Monterey in the 1930s. And so there was a business for this. And then the fishermen would go out and they would get the bull kelp, and they would actually take a big long pole with a knife on the end. They would cut it and then pull it back up and pull it onto their boat right here. And then they were selling it to a guy, New Monterey, who was grinding it up. And he was shipping it, putting it in barrels and shipping it back east. And there was a company back there that was utilizing it for to make synthetic dyes for synthetic silk. That's what it was being used for. But I note the date on this particular picture. It says Monterey, August 17th, 1931. That's almost 90 years, a little over 90 years to the day, right? Where are we? August 19th. So it's 90 years and 2 days to the day this picture was taken. This is wharf number 2. Looks like it was a foggy day when he took that particular picture. And then this, take a trip on the wharf. This is also about 1931. As I mentioned, the wharf at that time was predominantly Asian control, mostly Japanese. There was a Chinese gentleman at the fish market on the wharf at that time. This may have been the Chinese gentleman's fish market. Up on the roof, look, this is all dried fish that they're doing, drying fish on the roof of his business right here. That's another wonderful photograph. And then here is the building, wharf number 2. And you can see this is that corrugated building that's there today. As it was being built, this is one of the very first pictures that Julie Phillips took when he came to Monterey. Look at the beautiful Monterey clippers you see here and the harbor. It's just really a beautiful, beautiful photograph. To me, it says, that's Monterey, right? It says a whole lot to me. Then here is taken, this is also 1930s. This is not the Monterey Wharf. This is the side entrance to the Booth Sardine Cannery. So Booth Cannery was right next to the Monterey Wharf. Booth Cannery is the only wharf that was actually in Monterey proper. And so today you can go onto this beach today. This was taken obviously at a low tide right here. These boats have been beached on here on purpose. And I'm not sure why they did that. Maybe just how they haul it out for different reasons. I've actually never seen this angle of Booth sardine cannery before. This is a fish ladder you see right here. One way he brought fish into his cannery. He has a wharf that's right about here. The boats come in and unload their fish. So Booth's cannery is one of the only canneries where the boats could actually come up to the cannery to unload their fish. Because of the design of Monterey Bay, the other boats, what's now Cannery Row, weren't able to do that because of the design of it here. And then here is Monte Beach. This is wharf number 2 here. This was taken in 1952. There was after a big storm that hit Monterey Bay and washed a number of boats onto the beach. And then this craft, it's a military vehicle called a bark. It was an experimental vehicle, and I zoom it up there, you can see it says experimental vehicle, U.S. Army bark. And it's an amphibious vehicle, so it brought it across the bay from Fort Ord, and they used it to tow the boats back in into the harbor. This boat, or this bark, unfortunately, not too long after this picture was taken, was being towed up to the Bay Area, and there was a couple of guys in the back of it, and it got caught in a pretty rough weather, and it sunk. And the two military guys that were aboard on the back of it actually drowned, unfortunately, on that. And here's another beautiful photograph. This is a Chinese junk, obviously. This is not Monterey. This actually was taken, I believe, in Southern California, down near San Pedro. So Fish and Game offices, at least for the Fisheries and Marine Division, was in San Pedro, and the Monterey guys, Julie Phillips, would have to go down there from time to time for meetings and whatnot. I did a little research on this, and I believe this is a guy named Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson was an American doctor who was in Shanghai at the beginning of World War II, 1938, and he had married a Japanese woman, and they were concerned about Japan invading China, and so they wanted to get out, and they were not able to buy passage aboard any passenger ships. And so we actually bought this Chinese junk, and it got a very small crew. You can see it's not very big, and they sailed from Shanghai to Southern California. They did in 88 days, which was actually a speed limit, or it was a record at that time when they did that. And it's just really an amazing picture. And what I think is interesting to me about this is that the original Chinese fishermen that came to Monterey in the early 1850s also came by junk, and junk about this size. So it's similar to that. So which leads me to where we're going to next, of course, will be squid, because it was Chinese fishermen that created the squid fisheries here in Monterey, which is now the largest, economically, the largest fishery in California today. The Chinese fishermen, as I mentioned, arrived here in the early 1850s via these small 30-foot junks. There's actually a series of currents that'll push them all the way across. I believe that's what Dr. Peterson took, those currents, so it pushes them all the way across. And it comes out somewhere in Cape Mendocino, Northern California, turn right, and they'll sail down the California coast, eventually ending up in Monterey. In fact, the Chinese actually overshot Monterey into Mexico and tried to fight these currents back. We finally landed out of Point Lobos, where they were taken in by a Rumsian village who nursed them back to health. And when they got healthy, looked on the bay and said, "Hey, nobody's fishing out there." And the reason nobody's fishing Monterey at that time, because at that time there was no way to get fresh fish to the big markets like San Francisco, because the railroad hadn't arrived here yet. The Chinese understood the technology of drying all of their catch, would dry all of their fish, and once a month or so, a big Chinese junk would come down from San Francisco and pick up all that dried fish. And then they ship it back to China, to other Chinese camps along the west coast here. But the Chinese were also selling fresh fish to local citizens here in Monterey. They brought an economy here. 1874, when the railroad arrived here, it brought other folks to come fishing to Monterey, because now they had a way to get fresh fish to the big market in San Francisco. The Chinese, not wanting to compete with these guys, said, "Hey, we'll just start fishing for squid at night," because nobody wanted squid then. Squid was considered to be a junk fish. And so while the Italians were home sleeping, the Chinese are out fishing for squid. Then when the Sicilians arrived after 1906, they began to, when they weren't fishing sardine, because then Sardine was still a small secondary fishery. They needed something else to fish. They started fishing for squid, but they didn't want it. So they were fishing it and then selling it back to the Chinese. At the turn of the 20th century, the city of Monterey banned the drying of squid within the city limits. This picture was taken at wharf number 2, actually, about 1930. These are all Sicilian squid boats, completely filled with squid. You can see that here. I don't know if you can recognize this building is still standing in Monterey today. Yeah, that's just a wonderful picture. And then here are all the squid boats, all unloading squid at the wharf right there. And then here are 2 other squid boats, again, all completely filled with squid. Look at this guy, he's sound asleep on his boat right there, waiting to unload his squid. Right there, that's a great photograph. So around the turn of the 20th century, the city of Monterey banned the drying of squid within the city limits. If you've ever smelled dried squid, you would kind of understand why they did that. And so they moved all the squid drying ground, the Chinese did, out beyond the Monterey city limits, along the Salinas Highway, those fields across the airport that we today call Tarpey Flats. There are 3 large Chinese squid drying grounds out there. A man by the name of Wan Yi, who was the model for the character Li Chong in the book Cannery Row, had the largest of those squid drying grounds. This is where Wan Yi really made his big money. Wan Yi immigrated to Monterey about 1918, opened that general store that he called Wing Chong Market, right across the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Wing Chong, by the way, in Chinese and Cantonese, roughly translates to beautiful, prosperous. He'd buy the squid from those Sicilian fishermen, truck out to his ground. He would dip it in brine, lay on the ground to dry for 10 or 12 days. And if we needed a job in those days, we can go to work for Wan Yi. He'll pay us 25 cents an hour to rake up squid into big piles like this one right here. This is all dried squid. People used to refer to this as Squid Mountain, also known as Heliotrope Hill because of the purple color in it, but also known as Halitosis Hill because of the smell of the dried squid. That is a fish and game guy right there in his suit. The smell of dried squid. This is Wan Yi squid drying ground. You can see all the squid mountains you see right here, and these guys in the background raking up squid right back there. And then here is, again, more squid mountains. And Wan Yi had a secret process to get the dirt off of the squid. He wouldn't tell anybody how he did it. Because you lay on the ground and get all that dirt all the time. But Julie Phillips, who took all these pictures, he actually wrote on the back of this particular photograph how he did it. And you can see right here, this sort of conveyor belt contraption here. There's a hose right here, and there's a tarp. This stuff is all seen on a big tarp. And as the squid is running out this conveyor belt kind of thing here, and it drops off to the tarp, this hose is blowing air, blowing the dirt off all that dried squid. Then they would punch it down in this machine right here into burlap sacks, where you see right here. And because in those days, the shipping companies weren't charging by weight, but by volume. And they were shipping it. They were shipping it to Asia. They were shipping it to Japan, to China, to Hong Kong. To give you an idea of how well Wan Yi was doing in the dried squid business, 1930, during the Depression, he was making well over $30,000 a year in the dried squid business. The name of his dried squid business was Wing Chong. So it definitely was beautiful, prosperous for Mr. Yi. So this is a little bit later, 1950s. These are squid fishermen. This is right in the middle of the Monterey Harbor. And you can see he's got his net all laid out like that. Well, purse-seine net laid out like that. And then here they are dropping those squid into a sardine hopper. Once the fishery collapsed, the sardine fishery collapses, and they began to utilize those hoppers. So a few canneries continued to operate. And one of them was the old Hogan cannery. He sold his cannery in the 50s, but they were canning mainly squid, and that's the best stuff is all probably going to that cannery. And then here's another one of my favorite photographs. This was taken in 1939. This is right in the little cove at Hopkins Marine Station. These are our gill net fishermen, and gill net is a net you stretch across, and oftentimes between 2 bows. In this case, probably between this rock and another rock there. And if we can we can get a little close up here. We can see he's actually going to toss this rock over the side. And there I do that because there's probably a school of some kind of school of fish. They're going to swim into his gill net. That's why he's doing that right there. Cool picture. Then these are set line baskets here. This is something that really is a lost art. These guys are fishing rockfish, man, with these set lines. This is something that took hours and hours to do. And when you fish rockfish and baskets like this, in Monterey, these guys are mainly going south towards Big Sur, mainly off of Point Sur. And they would leave Monterey 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And it would take 4 or 5 hours to get to Point Sur. And then they'd set these baskets the day before, and they would fish all day. And how they operated the baskets on the front end of the basket, the front line that has a rock tied to it, the kind of weight, and they toss it to the side. The basket sits in the water, and as the boat is moving forward, the line will run out of that basket. Of course, it's all baited and hooked, and that's how they're able to catch the fish. So then after they're done fishing, again, it's now you're fighting currents. You're going north back to Monterey. It's going to take maybe 5, 6 hours to get back to Monterey. That's when they spend all that time baiting these baskets. They call it pinning. That's what they're doing right there. They're pinning their baskets. You can see right here, you can see the hooks all along. And this is a cork along the side of that basket. And that's how they do that. Really an incredible process. And you see, really a lost art. And the baskets, by the way, are made out of bamboo. So where were they going? They were going down to Point Sur. And this is Point Sur, taken around that same time the picture was taken. That's probably why he took this photograph. This is taken off of Highway 1, because you can see the telephone pole lines here. I'm not sure where they were when we took this picture. And so for fishermen, this part of Big Sur was known as the ranch. So this rockfish fishermen, abalone fishermen, the sardine fishermen all like to come down and fish down this area of Big Sur. And so they asked, well, where are you going fishing? Well, I'll be down at the ranch. Well, they knew where they were. They're going to be fishing down off of Point Sur. That's where that day fishing. That's another really beautiful picture of Point Sur. And then here is a really remarkable photograph. This is Monterey's past, present, and future in the sardine fishing industry, all in this one photograph taken in 1930. This is a Lampara boat. Again, refers to the type of netting that it uses. This is a half ringer or Japanese round haul. This is called a purse seiner. Again, refers to the netting it uses. This boat, by the way, this half ringer was a cross between this Lampara and this purse seiner, how it operated. And then here are 2 brand new purse seiners in the front here with the turntables. And that's how they pile on their nets onto the turntable. The turntable will turn right or left, and because they unload they set the net by dropping a large skiff into the water, and the skiff will go clockwise, the big will go counterclockwise, and the skiff takes the front end of the net, and then it circles around the school of fish, dropping the net, and it drops. The net can be 1,500 feet in circumference, drops several hundred fathom into the Monterey Bay with lead weights on the bottom, and it's got corks on the top and big rings around the front of it. As they pull up on a line, that'll close up that net like a big purse. Hence, it's called a purse seine net there. And then here is that Lampara boat. It looked beautiful. I mean, look at how many guys are on this boat here. There are 14 guys on this boat right here. So one of the advantages of the purse seine boat was you didn't need as many guys. It only took 12 guys to operate that boat, although it was a larger boat, but it has more mechanical had to use. You didn't need this boat. Almost everything was done by hand. There's no radios on this boat. There's no depth finders on this boat. The most technology in this boat is they'll take a piece of steel and they'll put some water or butter on one of that piece of steel and tie a rope around it, drop it into the bay, pull it back up, and there's sand stuck on the end. Hey, that means they can lay out their net because it's rocky down there. So it was a tough work doing that kind of thing right there. And then here is, I want to back up a little bit here. Whoop, my way. So here again, here's the Lampara boat, and you didn't put your fish on this boat, you pull the barge behind you, like this guy right here. These are called lighters, and these so you pull this lighter behind you. All your fish are going to these lighters. This is at the canneries along Cannery Row. Again, because of the design of Monterey Bay, these lighters couldn't get up those canneries to unload. So they had this system. This would be where they would drop this bucket from a cable down to the sardine hopper. They'd load up the hopper, they'd load up the basket, and then pull it into the canneries. Now, some of these lighters could take up to 60 tons of sardine, 60. And these baskets carry about 600 pounds at a time, going back and forth. I mean, that's gonna take a long time to unload your fish. You look closely here, you can see one of the early sardine hoppers here. They first made their appearance in 1926 in the Monterey Bay, which is a new delivery system for the canneries, which was an idea of Newt Hogan. He'd seen these sardine hoppers, or these field hoppers working in agricultural fields in California. The idea being in the fields, you put your fruits and vegetables in the hopper and they go by a conveyor belt into the cannery. He figured, why can't they work in the bay? And he had his engineers design these systems. The boats come up to those hoppers, drop their catch into them, and they work with a marine pump, and then they're funneled down to an opening that's about 3 feet across, and then they just 3 feet square, so then they would just suck them into the canneries. This thing could take up to 70 tons an hour. The force is so strong it literally would scale the fish as they went through it. So here is one of those large lighters unloading. This is at Monterey Wharf, actually, near the Booth Cannery. You can see how he's unloading his fish. Again, you got 60 tons. This is a whole thing. Man, this could take a long time to unload your fish, a long time. And then there's a beautiful picture of one of those lighters right in the middle of the harbor here. And these are all built locally, by the way, by the Sino brothers who built these beautiful lighters right there. Then sardine fishermen here, they're working with their purse seine net at the wharf, because oftentimes they would wash them down. They also would put this sort of tannic solution. Either they use this really thick goop on it, which they would bring in with through these big barrels or big vats, and they put them in, or they would sometimes pour it on like this way too as well. And the idea is, because these nets are made of cotton, they had to be treated, because salt water oftentimes will destroy that net eventually, so they would have to treat it. And that's what these guys are doing here. And you can see the turntable for the boat right there. And then here is our sardine fishermen getting ready to go out fishing for night fishing. Now, that's the big skiff they use to bring the net out there. And then, of course, the little skiff they use for different kinds of things. But if you look at these guys, you'll notice that they're they can kind of dress up before they go working, sport coats and hats. People wore hats in those days. Yeah, they just dress up and stuff. I love that. And then that's our friend Julie Phillips again. This is a program tagging sardines in Monterey Bay in 1936, which is a program that was created by Francis Clark. Francis Clark, as I mentioned, was running the tagging programs Fish and Game was doing. This is a program that was pretty progressive for its time. And what they were doing is they're going out on the bay and they were getting fish from the fishermen, or they caught them themselves. They're brought onto the little boat where they were being weighed and measured, and they would sex them, and then they would take a scalpel. This is a measuring board. Here, you can see the measuring board here. Then they would take a scalpel, open up that sardine right underneath its anal fin, insert a little numbered metal tag into the fish. It didn't hurt the sardine when they did that. They take a firecracker or cherry bomb, throw it over the side of the boat to scare away the sea lion, and dump all the sardines back onto the bay. And then Francis Clark had installed in all the big reduction plants big 50-pound magnets. And once a week or so, a fishing game guy goes through there to pick up all the stuff the magnet had picked up. A friend of mine, a guy named Bill Ripley, who went to work with Fish and Game in 1939, well, that was his job. And I said, Rip, what kind of stuff do you get? He said, I get this bucket full of nails and screws and old pieces of track. And he sorted out to find those little number metal tags. That was a really effective program. Because of that program, Francis Clark was able to say in 1939, you guys need to cut this fishery in half. But nobody paid any attention. What's important here is the Fish and Game biologists, these guys had no power. All they could do is make recommendations. All the power lies, and it still does today, with the Fish and Game Commission. The Fish and Game Commission is a group of political appointees. In those days, mostly businessmen. In some cases, businessmen had never even seen the ocean before. Be more, would be more pay attention to more businessmen like Cannery owners who hired their own scientists to tell them what they wanted to hear. So here's a beautiful photograph, again, of that sea lion or the clam census. And you can see here's MJ Linder, here's Francis Clark right here. Watch those, see what they're doing right there. This is taken by Gibraltar. And then here's a beautiful photograph of a good night's sardine fishing right there, bringing our sardines into the hole. So oftentimes fishing game guys, as I mentioned, out on these boats with these guys. Today, fishing game operates a little bit different today than the fishing game did in the 1920s and 30s. In Julie Phillips' time, their sole purpose in life was to work for the fishing industry. That's what they did. I mean, they were all the ways to support the fishing industry, to help these guys. And of course, I went to the things I showed last time, but just quickly, when the fishery collapses in 1950, they had to truck sardines up into Monterey. This is at Hogan's Cannery. These were being brought up from Santa Barbara. There's another beautiful picture of sardines being unloaded into the sardine hopper right here. You can load that guy sitting in the water right there. He's got 100 tons of sardine on that boat right there. And this thing loaded right into the sardine hopper, right? This is probably taken about 1938, you see right there. And then this is at Santa Barbara, loading fish in. And then here they are going up the truck, or from the truck, pump into the cannery. That's at Hogan's Cannery. And then that is I talked about this last time. Again, that is the Hogan's version of the Titanic. That is his little portable or floating sardine cannery. He bought an old big troop carrier, or those things that they used at Normandy during World War II to bring in tanks and big vehicles onto the beaches in Europe and in the Pacific. And he converted it into a cannery. And this was taken off of Moss Landing, and this is just one and only voyage. That's it. It was not successful. I don't know what happened to this. I don't know. And then here's one of my favorite pictures. That's Cannery Row. About 1952 or so. Look, I can roll a bowling ball down there and not hit a darn thing. So here's Hogan's Cannery right there. Today, that is the education department for the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Here is that crossover, the aquarium. This has one that they rebuilt. Theirs is a reproduction of this crossover here. Here is the Wing Chong Market right here. And then here is Atlantic Coast Fisheries, another crossover. If you know anything about in the sardine world, the canneries themselves are on the ocean side. The warehouses are on this side. Once all the fishermen can, they go by conveyor belt across these things called crossovers into the warehouse. And so if you look close, you can see here Monterey Canning Company here. That is the only crossover that is still existent, that's still there, that you can actually, and you can still walk across that one today. That's still there right there. And then just a couple quick pictures here. There's some beautiful images of some mackerel being unloaded at the Monterey Wharf, right into the fish market. And then these guys are fishing, I'm not sure, I think they're fishing some anchovy. Again, this is right in the middle, literally right in the middle of the Monterey Harbor. That's where they are. Monterey Wharf number 2 is, or Wharf number 1 is right there. That's where those guys are. And then here's one of my favorite pictures. This is a Monterey Abalone boat coming in after 3 days of fishing abalone, and he's pulling his little dive boat right behind him right there. So I think I bored you guys enough. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And I should point out a couple of things. As I mentioned, this collection is available. It is at the Monterey Library, and this is just a small fraction part of that collection. The collection also consists of photographs, besides photographs, but correspondence as well. And some of that correspondence is actually very important. A lot of it's just sort of mundane kind of things. Oh, we need pencils and erasers for the office. But there are a couple of other unusual kinds of things. In fact, there's a letter I found that was written in 1928 from one of the Schofield brothers. And it turns out that Ed Ricketts and his partner, A. Gallagher, weren't doing very well in the Pacific Biological Laboratory. They weren't making a lot of money, and so they applied for a job to work for Fish and Game. They wanted to be inspectors in the canneries, and so. Yes, and so Schofield's letter saying, "Well, hey, we can hire these guys, and we can get them cheap because they don't have any college degrees." So I don't think they got hired, but it's just something we found. I didn't know that those guys had applied to work in the canneries. I also found a letter that that Fish and Game at one point was working with a Monterey Abalone company. It was very top secret. They were very quiet about it, and they were experimenting with abalone to grow pearls. That's what they're trying to do, and they're doing that at Hopkins Marine Station. They wanted to keep it a top secret, and Fish and Game wasn't doing it so they think they could make money. They were doing it so they could go out and say, "Hey, you guys can raise pearls as well, support your fishery." Of course, it wasn't successful. I mean, abalone does grow what they call abalone pearls, but they aren't really great pearls. But they really did experiment with it and tried it. All right, so again, I think I bored you guys enough.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. That was great photos, great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this moment, it's open for questions for Tim. So please feel free to unmute yourself or type a question in the chat, and I'll read it out. So it's open for questions.
No. Okay.
I have a question. My name is Robert Vanderhook. Pat Hathaway, who was a photographer and a collector of photographs, how does he tie into Phillips photos in your work? Did you know Pat Hathaway too? Did you guys consult with each?
Yes, I knew Pat very, very well. And it ties in the sense that he also has photographs of some of the same fisheries, but they really are different. I mean, again, there are things in here that we've never seen before that Pat didn't have. Pat had a lot of photographs. They ended up focused on the sardine fisheries. He did have a lot of photographs that were taken inside the sardine canneries. That's one thing that Julie Phillips did not do. He did not take pictures inside the canneries because other fishing game folks are doing that kind of stuff. So he didn't do that kind of work. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tim, curious. I've seen from the pictures you've showed of the old boats in the harbor. Are there still quite a few of the old boats still around? We've seen some of the old ones out there. Are they just really weathered to look old, or? No.
At one time, there were 100 sardine boats, purse seiners, working Monterey Bay. Not all from Monterey, but there would be 100 at a season. There's not one there today. They're all gone. Every once in a while, someone will bring in a Monterey clipper. There are collectors, like people collect old cars or people collect old boats, and you'll see them that way, and they'll come in. But no, there are none out there anymore. And when the sardine fishery collapsed, actually during World War II, a lot of the sardine boats were purchased by the federal government. They were actually taken over, and they converted them to gunboats and different things for use during World War II. And when the fish got them back, they were really bad condition. And also a lot of boats were purchased by the government after the war and sent to Asia and things like that.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple questions in the chat. First one, how does the local fishing industry in Monterey now compare to the time period your talk covered, both as far as what is being fished and how important it is to the local economy?
Well, some of the same things are being fished for sure, but it's a totally different fishery today than it was then. There wasn't as much control of the fisheries in Julie Phillips' time as there is today, for sure. And they're not fishing the same things. Abalone, there is no abalone fishery in California anywhere. There's no commercial abalone fishery whatsoever. It hasn't been one since 1998. There's not even a sport fishery for abalone anymore in California. That's completely stopped today because it's heavily controlled to that kind of thing. Squid, as I mentioned, is the big fishery in California, also here in Monterey, at least economically. Sardines haven't been fished for a while, but they do still fish sardines in California, in Monterey. But there isn't a big market for it. The big money really isn't here. The big money for it is in Asia. But they will fish them for bait. They do fish them, and they'll flash freeze them and ship them to China, to Vietnam, where they'll can them. And then you can walk to your local Safeway today and buy what can of California sardines, actually called California Girl. You can buy that brand, and those are California sardines or pilchards that were probably fished in Monterey Bay, but they were canned in China.
Thank you. Next question. How does the sea urchin fishery rank now?
Sea urchin fishery, that I can't answer. I know the sea urchins are a real problem today for kelp and abalone in particular, because the sea urchins are destroying the kelp for us. And so there's a big push to clear the Willoughby urchins. Monterey never had a big urchin fishery ever. There are urchin fisheries, have been urchin fisheries, and I think there still is urchin fisheries in those parts of California. But today there is a big push, and there are actually volunteers who are going in parts of California to clear urchins out, hope to encourage and bring back the abalone fishery and bring abalone back into the kelp world.
Thank you. Next question. What was the progression of ethnic fishing groups in Monterey?
Ethnic. So depending how you want to look at it, so I go back 10,000 years. So Rumsian, native people of Monterey, I always say were the first commercial fishermen in Monterey, because that's literally how they made their living. They were fishermen. They were the first, they were the first abalone divers in Monterey Bay. We know that because of burials come out of the ground in recent years. The male burials they found, the males have what's called surfer's ear, which is a little bony growth that will grow over the ear if you spend a lot of time in the cold water, like the Monterey Bay. Which makes a lot of sense. They're diving a large abalone. That's what those guys are after down there. But then, of course, the Spanish were not fishermen. Mexicans were not fishermen. Really, Chinese arriving in the early 1850s. Portuguese arrived here also in the early 1850s. Portuguese whalers. The Japanese arrived here in about 1896 when Japanese began to arrive here. Genovese fishermen arrived here about 1898, 1899. Then Sicilians arrived here after 1906. And then really it jumps. I mean, others come in from periodically from time to time, but the next large group, I believe, would be the Vietnamese that comes in the 1960s.
Thank you. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions before we wrap this up?
A comment from Robert. Thank you for tying in Ed Ricketts a little bit with a nice story there, and also for talking comprehensively from kelp to abalone to sea otters. And that was a nice overall comprehensive, I think, presentation. Great photos too. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Tim, for an excellent presentation. Greatly appreciate it. And we will be back here next month with a different
Can I say something about next month? So
yes.
So next month we're starting our Cannery Row days for the third annual Cannery Row Day. And you remember from last year, it was an all virtual event that went on for about 3 months, and we focused on the book Cannery Row, have a number of different lectures and things that around that. And this year we're going to focus on the book Sweet Thursday, which is kind of a sequel to Cannery Row. And we have a lot of really great programs planned for that. And my program next month will kind of kick that whole thing off.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
And so next month we'll be talking about Cannery Row. Tim will be, and hope to see all you guys there. Thank you very much for everyone for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you next month. All right.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Sean.